Long before Christopher Columbus set foot on what would become America, this vast area was home to Native Americans. During the 16th and 17th centuries, many explorers attempted to invade their land, but the Native Americans reacted in phases, from cooperation to anger to rebellion. After standing on the side of France in numerous battles during the French and Indian Wars, and eventually being forced to leave their homeland under Andrew Jackson's Indian Expulsion Act, the Indian population and territory declined by the end of the 19th century. Here we explore the events that shaped the chaotic history of Native Americans after foreigners settled. In 1492, Christopher Columbus arrived at a Caribbean island following a 3-month voyage. Initially thinking he had arrived in the East Indies, he refers to the locals he encounters as Indians. On his initial day, he commands the capture of 6 natives to serve as servants. In 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon, a Spanish explorer, arrived on the mainland of North America in Florida and established contact with Native Americans. In February 1521, Ponce de Leon set off on a new journey to Florida from San Juan with the intention of establishing a colony. Shortly after his arrival, he is assaulted by local Native Americans and suffers fatal injuries. In May 1539, Hernando de Soto, a Spanish explorer and conqueror, arrived in Florida with the aim of subduing the area. He ventures into the southern territories under the direction of Native Americans who had been taken captive during his expedition. October 1540, De Soto and the Spaniards plan to rendezvous with ships in Alabama when they're attacked by Native Americans. Hundreds of Native Americans are killed in the ensuing battle. 1607, Pocahontas' brother kidnaps Captain John Smith from the Jamestown colony. Smith later writes that after being threatened by Chief Powhatan, he was saved by Pocahontas. This scenario is debated by historians. 1613, Pocahontas is captured by Captain Samuel Argall in the First Anglo-Powhatan War. While captive, she learns to speak English, converts to Christianity, and is given the name Rebecca. 1680, a revolt of Pueblo Native Americans in New Mexico threatens Spanish rule over New Mexico. 1754, the French and Indian War begins, pitting the two groups against English settlements in the north. May 15, 1756, the 7 Years' War between the British and the French begins, with Native American alliances aiding the French. May 7, 1763, Ottawa Chief Pontiac leads Native American forces into battle against the British in Detroit. The British retaliate by attacking Pontiac's warriors in Detroit on July 31st, in what is known as the Battle of Bloody Run. Pontiac and company successfully fend them off, but there are several casualties on both sides. 1785, the Treaty of Hopewell is signed in Georgia, protecting Cherokee Native Americans in the United States and sectioning off their land. Chief Powhatan, also known as Wahunsenacoo, was born in the Chesapeake Bay region in the 1540s or 1550s. He became the leader of more than 30 tribes and controlled the area where English settlers established the settlement of Jamestown in 1607. May 1942, members of the Navajo Nation develop a code to transmit messages and radio messages for the U.S. Armed Forces during World War II. Eventually, hundreds of code talkers from multiple Native American tribes serve in the U.S. April 11, 1968, the Indian Civil Rights Act is signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson, granting Native American tribes many of the benefits included in the Bill of Rights. July 1968, Dennis Banks and Clyde Bellecourt founded the American Indian Movement in Minneapolis, along with Bellecourt's brother Vernon and Banks' friend George Mitchell. Originally an urban-focused movement formed in response to police brutality and racial profiling, AIM grows rapidly in the 1970s to become the driving force behind the indigenous civil rights movement. November 20, 1969, a group of San Francisco Bay Area Native Americans calling themselves Indians of All Tribes journey to Alcatraz Island, declaring their intention to use the island for an Indian school, cultural center, and museum. Referencing Europeans' colonization of North America, they claim Alcatraz is theirs by right of discovery. On June 11, 1971, armed federal marshals descend on the island and remove the last of its Indian residents. November 26, 1970, On Thanksgiving Day, AIM members seize a replica of the Mayflower in Boston Harbor, declaring the holiday a national day of mourning. June 6, 1971. A group of Native Americans, led by AIM, occupy Mount Rushmore to demand the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie be honored. October 1972. Hundreds of Native Americans drive in caravans, beginning at the West Coast, to the offices of the Department of the Interior in Washington, D.C., in a movement called the Trail of Broken Treaties. During the occupation, AIM releases the 20 Points, a list of demands that includes the re-recognition of Native tribes, abolition of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and federal protections for indigenous cultures and religions. February 27, 1973. The Wounded Knee occupation begins as some 200 Oglala Lakota and AIM members seize and occupy the town of Wounded Knee, South Dakota, on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. The occupation lasts for 71 days, during which time 2 Sioux men are shot to death by federal agents, and several more are wounded. January 4, 1975. Congress passes the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act of 1975, which reverses the termination policy of previous decades when American Indian tribes were disbanded, their land sold, and relocations forced Indians off reservations and into urban centers. July 15, 1978. A transcontinental trek for Native American justice called the Longest Walk sets off from Alcatraz Island, California. By the time marchers reach Washington, D.C., they number 30,000. August 11, 1978. The American Indian Religious Freedom Act is passed, granting Native Americans the right to use certain lands and controlled substances for religious ceremonies. October 11, 1980. President Jimmy Carter signs Indian tribes, including the Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Penobscot, $81.5 million for land taken from them more than 150 years ago. November 16, 1990. President George H.W. Bush signs the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAPRA, into law. The act requires federal agencies and museums that receive federal funds to repatriate Native American cultural items to their respective peoples. July 13, 2020, the Washington National Football League franchise announces it is dropping its name, the Redskins, as well as its Indian head logo. The move is in response to decades of criticism that they are offensive to Native Americans. The team is eventually renamed the Commanders. July 23, 2021. In response to criticisms, Cleveland's Major League Baseball team announces they are changing their name to the Guardians and are dropping their previous name, the Indians.